Morning, everybody. Very nice to see everybody on this Jewel morning. Jewel is a white tea from Fuding, Fujian province, Fuding County, Fuding area. So white tea has a lot of mystery around it. Part of the mystery is in the history of it. Part of the mystery is an interpretation of the history of it. And then there's a third mystery, because here in the West, so much attention is given to fully fermented teas, purer teas. You see so many people attach some sort of spiritual significance to these teas. And yet, in China, that's not where most of the spiritual significance lies. It usually lies with white tea. And this will shock most people here, because and I don't even really understand how that happened here in the West. White tea, and by the way, my own understanding of white tea is beginning to change. So how can my understanding of all understandings start to change? Well, as more historical evidence comes to light, and as more academic scholars and historical scholars start to comment on texts, I suddenly realize there are reasons to start to shift a little bit. So white tea is one of those areas where I am starting to shift a bit. So what's the old story? The old story was, before the middle 1800s, there was no such thing as white tea. White tea in the sense that we know it now. And I have to get into that sense in a little bit more detail, because I'm about to make a distinction, and I'm about to start to argue that, in fact, the first tea that was consumed in China was white tea. So this is a big change in what I've talked about before, and it's more of a cosmetic change than an underlying change philosophically or scientifically. So let me be very clear about this. In the ancient days, so we're talking about BC, when tea was first discovered, it was thought of as a medicine. So how did they use it? Probably just picked it and chewed it, and it was designed or thought to help detoxify, get you rid of any poisons that you have. And that's certainly the traditional way that it's talked about. So far we're good, right? Get rid of poisons, you chew. That has nothing to do with any type of processing modality. The complication then comes from that starting time to the time that tea becomes a beverage, because probably in the initial period, storage period, it was being dried. And that's when they were using it. We're going to pick some of this, we're going to dry it. And then later, when they needed it, we'll chew it and use it as a medicine. After that, we'll use it as a catalyst for other traditional Chinese medicines. So one could make an argument, as I've now seen some Chinese scholars make, that in fact, that was white tea. So here's why they're making that argument, and here's why I can't disagree. They're making that argument because they're saying you're basically picking and you're withering, you're drying in some way, most likely sun dry. And that in effect is exactly the first steps of white tea. That's not really the first steps of green tea. So you pick, yeah, that step is identical. But for green tea, what is it you do again? You try as quickly as possible to prevent oxidation. And how do you prevent oxidation? You prevent it by applying heat. So when we're talking about white tea, so the current definition of white tea, and there's no change in that definition. So don't get all panicked. Oh my God, he's changing definitions after X number of years of saying this, that, and the other. I'm still saying this, that, and the other. And what I'm saying is you pick, you sun dry, and then you bake. Those are the basic steps of white tea. There is no change to that. That's the definition of white tea. What is changing here, and what I'm trying to get all of you to understand why I'm making a subtle change here, is that it's quite possible, not quite possible, it's almost certain that when tea was first discovered, before it became a beverage, it was withered, it was dried, and then chewed. And then as it became a beverage, not a catalyst, because as a catalyst, they used that withered and dried, mixed it with traditional Chinese medicines, and went ahead and used them. As it became a beverage, the Chinese then applied heat to the picked leaves to prevent oxidation. And really, I'm using words, when you think about it, that weren't going through their head. They didn't wake up one morning, let's make this a beverage. Okay, in order to make this a beverage, I got to prevent oxidation. Why do I have to prevent that? Because I want the look and feel of freshness. I know if I wither it, it will have a dried look and it won't look as fresh as if I actually apply heat and prevent oxidation. So remember, you and I are using the language of the science that follows the action of applying heat. We're also using our eyes to look. Oh yeah, that's green. And we're also understanding that when you use heat and you stop that oxidation and then you decide to make tea cakes, you get a certain color, which I believe drove those people at that time to go ahead and do that process. They also happened to like the flavor, obviously, because they kept doing it. And they stopped the idea of, well, they never got to the idea at that time, as far as we know, of making white tea cakes. Everything, once they started to do cakes, was green tea cakes. And therefore, by definition, you stop the oxidation. It looks fresher from an observation point of view, and it fit a certain palate style at that time. They may have, one could easily make the argument, and I think that this is why some of the professors, some of the academics are making this argument, that the flavor profile of the withered tea leaves, especially in the beginning, that was associated with medicine. And it wasn't associated with a beverage. And therefore, to leave that medicinal association, oh, you're sick, you better take, to leave that, let's do a beverage that doesn't have that association. So this all makes sense to me as I started to think about this. And again, over the years, there are more and more intellectual journals, academics who are making not 100% this same argument. I'm filling in all what I see are empty spaces. So by talking about, well, you go from a medicinal taste to a pleasure taste, that's me. I haven't seen one academic article which says this is what happens. But as I read these things, I'm thinking, okay, that makes sense. We get to a palate change so that you have something you can give to kids, you can give to everybody. Hey, here's a beverage. We're going to have contests with this beverage. This thing is, and they got used to that. And so essentially, it looks to me, as I read more and more of the literature, that white tea, that methodology disappeared into history, so to speak, because tea became, instead of a direct medicine or a catalyst for traditional Chinese medicines, it became a beverage. And as it became a beverage, okay, let's have these contests with tea cakes. Let's see what different shapes we can make with tea cakes. Hey, let's see if we can, a la Tivana, put in some fruits and all sorts of other little things in those cakes and have contests. And nobody was talking about simply withering and then completely drying. Nobody was talking about that. And so hence my blind spot until these academics started to bring up the fact it was probably done this way. And therefore, technically speaking, this was the white tea way of doing tea, although it wasn't being used as a beverage. So that's the footnote to what I've said in the past. And that's why I want to make some clarification about that, because I think you're going to hear me, unless other information comes to the fore, more and more say this in terms of the order in which tea modalities, production modalities were implemented or discovered. So when did drinking white tea as a beverage become clearly popular and clearly done in the way that's close to the way it's done today? Certainly in the mid-1800s, it was that way out of Fuding, out of Zhenghe, out of Jinyang. Fujian province was doing that. As far as we know, nowhere else in China was doing it. So we got that part right, just in that area. And by the way, where else, even if it was just in this area, were they sending it to people all over China? The answer would be no. Although surprisingly, in the Chinese literature, they must have exported a little bit, because in England, one of the early queens was said to have liked white tea. I don't know where that came from, but somehow somebody secured some white tea that became liked, but it never became a steady export. It didn't expand its region of production, and it was still limited to certain varietals. So let's talk about those varietals, because we've talked about them before, but we've never talked about them the way I'm going to talk about them today. So you had Fuding Baihao, Fuding Dahao. You had Zhenghe Dahao, Zhenghe Baihao, and these are all slightly different. One of these, and we're only going to focus on two today because we're in Fuding. I don't care what they're doing in Zhenghe or anywhere else today. Today I'm focused on Fuding, and Daha. The Daha was grown all over the place in Fuding. It's so interesting because it became an ornamental plant as well as a plant of actually making tea from. So you had these gardens. So let's back up. Let's think of an analogous situation here in the US. Let's think of the jasmine plant. We see the jasmine plant all over the place, planted ornamentally. We like the fragrance, we like the way it grows, we like the way it looks, but we don't harvest it. We don't use it for jasmine tea. This is what that particular varietal in Fuding, in the whole region of Fuding, was used as. It's an ornamental plant, in addition to it being used as a plant that they produce tea. All right, so that's important to understand. The other thing that's important to understand is that in Fuding, you also have history. And what kind of history am I talking about? Legends. So you have the legend of Langu. This is some lady who BC at some point early on used these varietals to help children who had measles, help children who had other skin conditions. So somehow this legend is of this lady using this in a medicinal way and probably preparing it as a drink. Although that I'm not sure. It's a legend after all. This legend further goes on to state that this lady became known as Lady Taimu. So in Fuding, there's the Taimu Mountain. That's the most famous. And there's a cave there. And that's where the original plant was supposed to have grown. And there are a bunch of legends about that. I mean, in Chinese history, there are legends everywhere. And that's why it's wonderful. You can just go to the legend encyclopedia. If you need something to prove your point, oh, okay, you just pick this, that. You see, it's this. So in this cave originated this plant. Part of that legend has to do with guanine. And we were, like I said, I could spend session after session talking about legends. The point being, this Lady Taimu used this, and in the Han Dynasty, that mountain, so it's really interesting. That mountain became named Taimu Mountain, and that was the official name during the Han Dynasty. So Han Dynasty is long after this original legend, but somehow this legend was rich, and it inspired one of the officials of the Han Dynasty was ordered to go to these famous mountains and codify the names. And he codified, this was the first mountain, codified this as Taimu Mountain. And so this is one of the most famous places where Fuding tea grows. And you get Fuding tea from this area, hugely expensive, tastes really, really good. And you're getting geographically a terroir that has sea air, because it's very close to the ocean. And in general, this place is fairly humid. The average temperature is around 60 to 65, and you get about 50 inches of rain a year in this area. So in Fuding overall, how many acres approximately are devoted to white tea? You have about 33,000 acres devoted to white tea. So the process is still no different than what I said before. You wither and then you dry. What is different? Oh, by the way, wither. What's important? You sun wither. The drying is, if you can, you sun dry. But if the weather conditions don't permit, you bake it dry. But no matter what, it's got to be sun withered. That's the magic of white tea. So what you see missing opposed to green tea, you don't see any oxidation prevention. So therefore, as you're handling the tea leaves, some oxidation must be going on. Probably up to about 5% of oxidation. And how does this change the overall components or properties of white tea? So by the way, this is going to touch upon why I think in China there's so much spiritual connection to white tea. And it will also give you an indication of why there's so little here. First off, in the West, white tea until recently was kind of an anomaly. You talk about white tea in the 70s, 80s, and 90s? Not really. You started to talk about white tea in the 2000s in the West. And from a production standpoint, white tea has just held this very steady position in China of being one of the least produced teas. And then all of a sudden, between 2010 and 2017, production doubled. Production doubled. It's already a small amount. But it doubled all of a sudden. Why? That's because in the West and in China, more interest started to be paid attention to white tea. Actually, people, not interest, started to pay attention to white tea. Why? Alleged health benefits. All of a sudden, oh, it's good for the skin. Now, the Chinese who lived in Fuding, Zhenghe, and Jinyang already knew it was good for the skin. And for years and years, had used it to help skin issues. But a national report in 2008 by scientists in China about how good it was, all of a sudden got everyone, well, all the women at any rate, because it was alleged to be very good for complexion, became interested. And that meant big companies became interested. And that meant that cosmetics companies started to do white tea extract and include that in their formulations for skin health. And as they studied further, they started to go backwards as well. So what do I mean? They started to look historically and see in this area, were the tea varietals associated with some special benefits? And it turns out that in Chinese poetry, it does appear that in this area, from at least the Tang Dynasty, you have some attention. Now, it's subtle, and you have to be a historian in order to pick this up. But as soon as you pick it up, you see it again and again. And therefore, this is why some form of white tea may have been available earlier. Not clear. Certainly, these varietals produced in the white tea methodology are now beginning to, in Chinese scientific circles, be at the top of the heap. Why? Highly anti-inflammatory, clearly lead to lowered blood lipids, lowered blood pressure. There are a number of other indications also for white tea. Highly anti-tumor, helps with radiation exposure. In other words, it doesn't give you radiation. If you have radiation exposure, it helps prevent the negative aspects of radiation exposure. This stuff, the more they roll out information, appears incredibly good for the body. So let's think again about green tea and white tea here. Because green tea, we're stopping oxidation. White tea, we're not stopping oxidation. So somehow letting a little bit of oxidation occur. Is that the real secret? Probably not. The real secret is not applying heat, because it appears that applying heat may somehow either change some of the preventive good health aspects or decrease some of them. Now, did I just make an argument that you should stop drinking green tea and every other type of tea that applies heat and only drink white tea? The answer is, I did not explicitly make that statement. And remembering that we already know that green tea, even though it's undergone heat processing, has incredible benefits. So I'm not trying to advocate for one over the other. So don't get that mistaken. Nonetheless, if you love white tea, have a little bit more. If you don't love white tea, try again.
And rub it all over your face afterward.
Hey,
Skin.
perfect. And rub it all over your face for your skin. These are all good suggestions. So that's the new information I wanted to introduce you to today. I do want to talk about one other thing, and then I promise no more digressions. Zhang Tianfu. This guy comes from Fujian province. His ancestors, I should say, come from Fujian province. He was actually born in Shanghai, but spent quite a bit of his life in Fujian. Now let's see. Let's go through the basics, because, you know, we're here in the US. We like basics. When was his birthday? Good question. September 21st, 1910. Oh, okay. That sounds like a good day. When did he pass away? In 2008. Oh, my math is horrible. In 2018 is what I should have said. 108 years later. This is the #1 name in the tea industry. This kid was smart. He went into agriculture, sciences, early on made an argument that you've got to understand agricultural scientists in order to make all the crops better. And from early age, focused on tea. He founded the 3rd Research Institute in Fujian, Fuan. And that one has become, over the years, the most famous of them. And they have all sorts of experiments that they've done there over the years. He founded that in 1935. This is the story of somebody who was born into a Christian family. He remained a Christian, as far as we know, all his life. He was attacked in the 1950s for being a rightist, and then again during the Cultural Revolution. But he prevailed. And he prevailed because he believed in tea and he believed in science. And the only regret, you know, I try to live my life as regret-free as possible. And I do, and the tea master actually shares this regret. We actually had an appointment to see Zhang Tianfu in 2017. And we canceled for a variety of reasons and did something else, thinking, okay, we'll go the next year or the next year and go visit him. And darn it, that's the one thing I think in all these years, I wish that we had actually gone and seen him because it would have been fun. By the way, he and two other scientists are directly responsible for the new varietal early spring, which in China is one of the most famous varietals. That's Jinjunmei. So this guy was full of energy. And by the way, at 108, he was still full of energy. He was still full of life. So that's a name over time I'm going to spend more time talking about because there's lots to talk about. Go ahead.
His name, folks have asked for his name in the chat. Could you please say the name and spell it for me?
Yes, John Tianfu. So surname John, Chang, and his name was Tianfu, Tianfu. All right. So without further ado, because I know so many of you love jewels. Well, let's go ahead and have the jewel, and let's have the tea master jewel come up here and prepare the tea jewel. So she'll prepare it, and then she'll prepare it with you all. So without further ado, the ruthlessly attractive tea master, Bijou.
Hi, good morning. 早上好。Yeah. We do white tea, 烤白茶。Okay. Today 呢，this tea 呢，from the Fuding Yeah, 拿from the 正和银佛界。Okay. So today 呢，we the change, the 3 cup.
Yes, so the tableau, she's got 3 cups here. We're going to use 170-degree water. What are you looking for? Okay. And go through the normal steps. So that means heat the cups with water that's anywhere between 170 and 212. Make sure that they're spick and span clean, no soap stains or anything like that. And then after that, she'll put in the dry leaves and heat them up. Step number 1, make sure everything is clean, spick and span. What do you need? Oh, I see. So for those of you who are paying attention, she made a slight equipment adjustment. So she slanted the tray so that when water goes in the tray, it easily drains into the sink. So this tells you something about tea rhythm. As you're doing anything with tea, whether it's small cup or large cup, you're paying attention to everything that you're working with. You're paying full attention to the surroundings. And as such, as you notice, you make adjustments. All right, she's drawing water. Dissipating the steam. Aerating the water. And this is what she's going to use as the steeping part. Cooling it down. Okay, and there's the tea leaves. Just put them in the heated cup. Let's shake the cup, heat the leaves. And then puts the water into the kettle, which has this spout so that she can control the pour. On the sides of the cup, trying to pour in essence underneath the tea. You get 3 great steeps with this. The time is set for 2 minutes. And look at how beautiful this is. You've got this tea resting on the top. Why is this such a good way to do tea? Because what you really want is for a portion of the tea to stay dry. Part of it is in the water, but part of it isn't. So when you do your second brewing, you get some of that energy into mixed with the tea that has already extruded some of its energy. So this is one of the reasons you do this, and it's an important reason that you can get 3 great steeps easily with this. The other thing you'll notice when you actually make this tea, you're not doing that yet, but you will in a minute, is this is a very high grade of this particular tea. How would you know that immediately? One of the reasons is the number of buds. High number of buds included in this. Remember, when you have a higher number of buds, what has the farmer given up? They've given up all the leaves that would have developed out of that bud. So this is 1 or 2, but for the most part, 1 leaf and 1 bud. And so the farmer's given up 3 to 4 leaves. And that's one of the reasons this is so expensive. But by having that leaf and the bud together, you get a deeper flavor. Timer is going off. Tea master, not in a hurry, but very present, separating the tea leaves from the tea itself. Okay. So, take a look at this. It's got some color, doesn't it? That's because there are tea leaves in there, not just tea buds. So it's got some color. Even before it's got actually, even before I put my nose in, I can smell it.
We lost the video feed for a sec. Could you please hold it up to the?
Oh, sure, no problem.
See that?
So looking again, it's got a little bit of that yellow color in there. And again, that's because of the tea leaves. All right, so we're going to enter the quality arena. Quality arena is the opportunity to taste into this tea and really figure out where's the astringency, because all tea has astringency. Where is it in your mouth? What is the aftertaste? And then what are the energetics? What does energetics mean? Energetics simply means how do you feel after you drink this? So you see some places say, well, the chi of this and the chi of that. Let's use energetics because that is something all of us can identify with. And I'm going to comment a little bit more about this in language because I had a wonderful session with a customer yesterday, and I want to comment on that as well. So let's enter the quality arena. Take 170-degree sip, let it cover the tongue, roll around in the mouth, swallow slowly, and observe. Take notes because we're going to have 3 consecutive whites. And all 3 of these whites are very special that are upcoming. This one, Jewel, followed by Comfort, followed by Silver Gossamer Needle. All right, I've already ascertained where stringency is in my mouth. Ooh, I have an aftertaste. Energetics, I'm still working on. Sip 2. Sip 2 reinforces the first impressions I have, plus I taste down into what the taste of this tea is and focus on aroma. By being 170 degrees, by the way, this allows your taste buds to become focused much more easily than the 200-degree teas. Can't do this with the 200-degree teas. I mean, you can do it, but you're not going to get a complete picture. You get a fairly complete picture with this. So I have a complete picture in my head. It's your turn to brew. So the tea master will demonstrate with you and brew with you, I should say. So make sure you've got that 170-degree water ready. Timer is set for 2 minutes. Heat your cups, make sure everything's clean. Anything between 170 and 212 can be what you use to heat and make sure everything is clean. Discard that, and now we're in for the real water that we're going to use. So this is, for us, it's preheated to 175. So we're going to aerate it, cool it down, and then go ahead and brew. You notice Tea Master is present. Just a nice rhythm. Not in a hurry. There is no hurry this morning. There's only Jewel this morning. Master is ready. Put it in the cup and the heat leaves, shake them around, smell, and then add the water back to the kettle so that she can control the pour. Not in a hurry. Pouring in effect under the leaves. Kind of a figure of speech, right? Because you're obviously going to hit some of the leaves. Set the timer for 2 minutes. But you're not going to stress about it because that's all part and parcel. And you heat the recipient cup. All right, I said I was going to talk to you about a fascinating discussion that a customer and I had yesterday. So that was Peter, because he had a great tea And he and I, after he experiences tea, always have discussions about the tea. And usually he gives me guidelines about energetics, kind of about mouthfeel, and then I make a judgment based on that. So got him going. He came back and had some descriptions. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't quite in sync. This is a language problem. And so you know how when you have wine, if you drink wine at all, and you go to the famous wine explainer, that magazine where somebody will write a description and they'll have 300 adjectives for a wine. Does that really work for you as identifying what's going on with the wine? For many people, it doesn't. And it really requires more of a discussion, more of a dialogue. So Peter and I, over the tea, had a discussion, and he said one thing which all of a sudden made it very clear he and I were on the same page. And listen to this beautiful description. He said it's like an old tree by a river. And as soon as he said that, I completely understood what he was trying to convey. Tea as like, by the way, your timers have gone off and you're expeditiously separating the tea leaves from the tea itself, but not in a hurry, just efficiently. So the point being that it takes a lot of dialogue many times to truly understand and make sure everybody's on the same page. And I'll tell you why. Because anything to do with flavor, anything to do with aroma, we're humans after all. And humans that have come from widely differing gene pools. And therefore, our languages, our starting languages is just so different. And therefore, don't be afraid to have a dialogue. That's the point here. When you have a dialogue and you talk enough about teas, you can all of a sudden be on the same page as you keep pushing the boundaries, you keep pushing the boundaries. And if you are part of that dialogue and you don't understand, indicate that you don't understand. Not that there's a right or a wrong. There isn't a right and wrong. There's more like, build me a bridge so I can understand where you are. Draw me a map so I can understand where you are. And it's the language as we go back and forth that helps do that. And you'll do that with me every week that we're on these sessions because, and that's what I'm really looking for. You're advancing the language around which we can have an understanding of this tea. So it's your turn to go ahead and enter the quality arena and start to think about what it is you're detecting, and then go ahead and let me know and take good notes. Yes.
For sure, back Stacy shares, I am getting the astringency on the roof of the mouth towards the back with energetics of calm alertness.
Energetics of calm alertness, and the roof of Stacy's mouth is getting the astringency. Mine, by the way, thank you for that comment. That's great. Mine, by the way, was on my tongue, not on the roof of my mouth. So again, having this discussion is great because genetically we're different, but we're both getting that astringency because it does exist. And that I like the alertness and calming. And in a minute, I'll discuss part of what leads to that. Yes.
Kathy shares bright and fresh flavor.
Bright and fresh flavor. Love this comment as well, because white tea gets a bad knock sometimes. And the bad knock seems to be that, oh, it's really light. Well, wait a minute. Actually, Kathy just dispelled that for this. Bright and energetic. And fresh, I'm sorry. Bright and fresh. And that brightness comes through right away. Great comment. So as you're continuing to think about this, one of the reasons that there tends to be a calming, and everybody tends to at some point get the calming / grounding, is because the L-theanine seems to work its magic strongly in white teas. Yes.
Cindy shares on the flavor and texture front, tart and velvet.
Oh, I like this comment. Cindy has this as tart and velvety. So the tart combined with Kathy's bright starts to paint a really beautiful picture. And the velvety combined with Stacy's calming is that sense of, hey, this is a pretty easy tea to drink. Great comment.
Jennifer says the color of the brewed leaves is so unusual. It looks like green tea.
Oh, thank you for being alert to this, because I did not give this away when I was actually looking down when it was brewed the first time. But I was noticing, oh my God, that's really green. Some of it is. So you've got this, and Jennifer made this comment about how it really almost looks like a green tea has been brewed. Great, great comment. And this is all of these comments, all of this dialogue is building a bridge, it's building an understanding of this beautiful tea.
Peter shares some viscosity and lasting power. I'm not having to search for the tea. It's easy to meet.
Peter has the comment, some viscosity and lasting power, and love this conclusion. It's easy to meet. In other words, again, sometimes white tea gets a bad rap as, oh gosh, how can anything that looks this light really have any substance in my mouth? And yet Peter just described substance in the mouth, a substance that's staying. It's got staying power.
Stacy says, I keep getting a very slight hint of dried fruit.
Ah, hint of dried fruit. Stacy gets this in this, and that's great because I actually get a hint of fruit myself. I wouldn't have characterized it as dry, but remember, we're genetically different. The fact that we both taste some fruit in it is the relevant part. Great catch, Stacy.
G shares visually full of trichomes suspended in the tea.
Ah, very nice, Jeannie. Full of trichomes suspended in the tea. This absolutely has trichomes floating all around. And for those of you who don't remember, trichomes are the white hairs that are on the surface of the tea. They act as a natural anti-bug. It's almost like a pesticide, but it's not a pesticide. The bug bites and doesn't like the taste and then moves on. And what is it that's bitter? And by the way, it is bitter in the trichomes. It's the fact it's full of polyphenols, and polyphenols tend to be bitter as a substance. And white tea in particular, all the high quality white tea that hasn't undergone a lot of processing. So for example, your needle teas, the needle and 1 or 2 leaves they tend to have a lot of trichomes. Once you get down to leaves only or aged white tea, you don't see trichomes as much. So from my perspective, and you keep tasting, from my perspective, if you are entertaining and you have a group of people coming and you can't figure out what's going to satisfy everybody in a group, this is a good type of tea to lead with because it's easily perceived. It's cool enough that people can perceive it fairly quickly. It's enough oomph in it that even people who don't tend to be tea drinkers and think, oh, it's too light, they're not going to think that with this. So I always, actually, even with people who are coffee drinkers, when they come in, oh, I'm a coffee drinker. One of the choices, I always give them a couple choices, and one of the choices is a white tea, because I know that somehow it will produce a surprising effect on their palate. Yes.
Jennifer says, I'm just getting to the second brew, and I agree with the comment about the fresh taste. Similar to the color of the brewed leaves, it feels very fresh or even raw in a good way.
Fresh and raw taste. And Jennifer is noting that as she brews it a second time. And all in a positive manner of speaking. It's something that's attractive about this tea. This tea is extremely attractive. It is, there's nothing in this taste that is off-putting, not even a little bit. And it's very consistent as you keep drinking it. And as you get down to the second steeping, it continues to be very consistent. And when you get to the third steeping, you're not going to be surprised. Yes.
Jeannie shares, I'm getting a cooling aftertaste.
Great. I was waiting for this. Cooling aftertaste is what Jeannie gets. I also get that cooling aftertaste. It's, for me, it comes very quickly. That first sip is like, oh my gosh, there is almost, it's not minty, but it's the effect of that coolness of minty, but not the flavoring of mint. Yes.
Kathleen shares, this tea seems to have a cleansing effect on my system. I can see how it could have been used for antidote of some kind in pre-brewing times.
Great catch, Kathy. Cleansing effect on her system. And she sits in the history of white tea and sees how this could have been used as a detoxifier or a cleanser for the system in such a pleasant and mild way. Great catch. Great catch. All right. Love the commentary that you've presented. You've really grokked Jewel. And Jewel is just that. It is a beautiful, very high quality white tea. And one that is just so easy to drink. So I salute you for all those great comments and for enjoying this with me today. Next week, we're going to go to comfort. And then we'll follow that with Gossamer Silver Needle. Lastly, and I should have done this at the beginning, we do have an event in the shop tomorrow from 3 to 5. So a Rinpoche is coming here, the Lama Buddhist tradition, and he's going to give a talk on Buddhism in here. I have no clear idea how many people are going to be here. And as such, if you're interested, you need to let me know today so that I can kind of reserve a place for you. Because I have a feeling that there may be a number of outsiders who come into the shop tomorrow. At any rate, your responsibility this week. Stay healthy. Really look forward to sharing comfort with you next week. You take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye, everybody.